welcome to another video about New Zealand immigration updates and insights. I'm David Fisher, New Zealand immigration specialist. It's middle of June 2024, and today we're going to talk about four main topics as a kind of a mid-year catch-up about the status of New Zealand immigration. The first thing we're going to talk about is work visas. Second will be residence, how to get residence, what types of approaches are still available in New Zealand. The third thing is any changes to student visas. And I'm going to talk generally about what's going on with student visas and the trend and whether it's still a viable pathway towards residency in New Zealand. And the last thing I want to talk about today is the change of character assessments for New Zealand. This is a very important topic because the fundamental approach of assessment of character in New Zealand has changed, and it's going to impact a lot of people. Okay, so first let's talk about work visas. Now, in the past, prior to the pandemic, New Zealand had quite a broad approach to work visas. It was all about filling gaps in the New Zealand market. We had this thing called the Essential Skills Visa, and there were other various categories of work visa as well. Post-COVID, an entirely new system has been implemented. Many of you will be aware of this. This is called the Accredited Employer Work Visa. Now, many of us in the industry, before this visa was actually implemented, put our hand up and said, hey, we can see some problems here. But unfortunately, they did not listen to us, and they listened instead to their own advisors to implement the system, which led very quickly to a lot of problems. Essentially, Immigration New Zealand opened up a kind of a low-touch environment for work visas. They allowed accreditation for companies across the board, in many cases without really checking the status of the company. They allowed job check approvals, which is the stage where you prove the labour market testing that you cannot find New Zealanders. They allowed a lot of these to go through, and therefore they allowed a lot of workers into the country who maybe shouldn't have come. And in the end, what happened was this led to a lot of fraud. It led to a lot of, let's say, migrant exploitation, companies taking the chance of selling jobs. And so once Immigration New Zealand discovered this, what they did was, rather than closing the category or changing the policy strictly, or let's say boomerang back to the old policy, they've implemented some tweaks to how they assess everything. And what we're finding is that it's actually become really difficult to get a visa now. So any of you guys who've applied for a visa in the last couple of months will know, a visa or accreditation or a job check will know that, number one, it's taking longer than before. Number two, they're assessing more strictly documentation. And number three, we are even noticing they're declining some applications that really should be approved. So to make a long story short, what I'm trying to say here is that to get these accredited employer work visas is a lot harder now than it has been in the past. And really what this means for most of you, if you're thinking about applying, is to make sure that you have, number one, good advice, and number two, that you really do have a genuine case going forward. So that's the accredited employer work visa system. And people are asking me, okay, well, besides the accredited employer work visa, is there another option? There is. Well, there are a number of options actually, but rather than go into detail about every single tiny work visa category, which is not going to be applicable to most people, there is one category that I think many people should know about, and that is called the specific purpose work visa category. This category is still available and open for anyone. Now, what is it? A specific purpose work visa is essentially a visa that's granted for a specific purpose. An example of a specific purpose could be, let's say that you work for an international global company, and they have a branch in New Zealand, and they need you to go to New Zealand to help train local staff for a 6 months period, and then return to your home office. There's a specific purpose. Another one might be, perhaps there's an employer in New Zealand who has purchased some machinery, and in order to operate the machinery, they need a specific person from the company who sold the machinery to come into the country and set up and program and train people on that machinery. This is a specific purpose. Another type of specific purpose are senior management, people with expertise being transferred. You've got sports players, various talented professionals. There's actually a wide range of categories that can fit into this specific work visa category. So that's another category to look for. The third main category of work visa is partnership applications. Now, a lot of changes have come about with partnership applications recently, and this is where you want to be careful. Don't get caught out, because if you're applying as the partner of someone who holds a work visa, the rules have changed a lot. There are now conditions applying to your visa. You will still be assessed according to the same criteria, which is that you must be living together in a genuine and stable partnership that is entered into for the purpose of maintaining long-term, etc., etc. And then when your visa is granted, there will be conditions linked to it, depending on what your partner for which the application is attached to, for what visa they hold. For example, if the partner holds an accredited employer work visa, then you can apply for a partnership-based visa attached to that application, but your conditions on your visa will also be that you must work for an accredited employer and that you must earn a pay rate that matches with the median wage that's applicable for that application. So in other words, whereas in the past, let's say an applicant can apply for a work visa, come to New Zealand, and then the partner will come together and receive an open visa. Now what happens is, if the first applicant has an accredited employer, the second applicant will get an open visa that has conditions. And this is something to be careful about as well, and keep in mind, because those partners can't just go into whatever job they like. They're going to be stuck on certain types of jobs. Okay, let's go on to talk about residence. What is the current status of residence applications in New Zealand? So things changed a lot once the pandemic came to an end. There was, many of you may know, the RV21 applications, or otherwise known as the Special Resident Visa 2021 Residence Category Visa. This was granted to tens of thousands of people. Over 100,000 people were granted residence under this category, and many of them have only been in New Zealand for a few years, but it's because the government allowed, as a contribution for the country during COVID, residence for all of these people. Now, as a result of that, the category of residence applications based on work and employment slowed down dramatically. It was closed for a long time, but now reopened with a new policy for the skilled migrant category. And this is where things are a little bit confusing, because if you search online and try to find the category for residents, you'll see that there's skilled migration or skilled migrant category, or this sort of skilled residence category. And then there's over here called the skilled migrant category. So they sound the same. The point is that immigration is trying to say, okay, we want to grant residence to people who are skilled. And over here we say there's a skilled residence category, which they have under there the green list. The green list, tier 1, tier 2, and this kind of a work to residence pathway for some people. But then over here you have the skilled migrant category. So just to distinguish those two things, the green list is a list of occupations that New Zealand has determined that we are in need of and that we would like to grant residence to you, either immediately if you meet the criteria, or based on a sort of a 2-year work to residence process if you meet the criteria under that list. But then over here we have the skilled migrant category, which is technically SMC, technically the points-based category that's always been there, but now with a new points criteria. It's supposedly a simplified 6-point criteria, simplified down from the previous 180 points that were required. And those 6 points can be made up of a combination of your qualifications and your job offer, whether that requires any registration or the pay level, right? And topped up with, on the other hand, your work experience in New Zealand. Now, I'm not here to go through every single detail of this category. All of the information can be found online, but fundamentally, the key points to note are: you first must have a job offer. Okay, without a job offer, you cannot apply for skilled migrant category. That job offer must meet the requirements for residence at a base level, which is the pay rate, minimum 30 hours a week, it's full-time permanent employment, okay? And then based on that job offer, you can then claim points depending on is it a job that requires registration? And then the points will be 3, 4, 5, or 6, depending on how many years it takes you to get that registration. For example, a lawyer who takes a 4-year bachelor degree to become a lawyer. So there's a certain number of points for that. Whereas someone with a PhD, because a PhD requires many, many years of study, a PhD is going to be worth 6 points on its own. And then B, you can top up those points with your work experience in New Zealand, and it's 1 point for 1 year experience, 2 points for 2 years, and 3 points for 3 years. Okay, so at the very minimum, who can apply for skilled migrant category? It's somebody who gets 3 points from one category and 3 points from the other, being work experience. At the maximum, someone can actually claim 6 points immediately from their PhD or something that requires that many years of registration. I'll give you an example. If you have a bachelor degree, and your bachelor degree can be in any area, like you could have a bachelor degree in performance music, but then you have a job offer, so the bachelor degree is worth 3 points. Then you have a job offer, you could be an office manager or a chef, but as long as that job offer meets the requirements, you come to New Zealand and you work for 3 years. Your 3 years for a bachelor degree plus 3 years work experience, 6 points. Another example, which we are recommending to people to consider, is if you have studied a master degree. A master degree is worth 5 points. That master degree plus 1 year work experience in New Zealand, 6 points. It's a reasonably straightforward pathway. The thing to note, and I think the big sort of, let's say, downside of the skilled migrant category is uncertainty. If you are a person who does not have the ability to claim 6 points immediately, let's say you've got a master degree that's 5 points, or you've got a postgraduate worth 4 points, or a bachelor degree worth 3 points, you still need those extra points from work experience. So in other words, you will need to apply for a work visa under the accredited employer system, come into New Zealand and work for a period of time before you can apply for residence. The downside for many of you is that creates uncertainty. You're going to maybe sell your house, you're going to give up your job, move your children, change schools, life. And if there's uncertainty about the future, then it's harder to make that move. So this is what I see as the downside of that category. The upside is that if you are one of those people who is either on the green list, which I mentioned before, or who has that 6 points immediately, you can apply straight away for residence. You can possibly even be granted residence before you arrive in New Zealand. Okay, and so that's the good news about that residence category. So that's an overview of where we see the current residence system is at, and as a kind of a comment about how we view it and what we think about that category is, we're not too happy as professionals about the process and the changes, because it's become a little bit more complex for many people, but we're quite happy to see that there are some clear pathways for people who are really eligible. And the trend, if you want to follow the trend of what the immigration department and what New Zealand is really looking for, we're looking for highly skilled, highly qualified, highly paid. These are the things that New Zealand is looking for. And if you're in that category, it's going to be a reasonably smooth pathway to residence in New Zealand. If you're not in that category, that's where you want to start considering the other options and pathways, such as what's next on my list to talk about, which is student visas. So what has been going on with student visas? And actually, to talk about student visas here in the middle of 2024, in June 2024, it's not really so much to talk about changes in policy, because the policy itself has not really changed too much to speak of in the last few months. There are some tweaks that have come about, and you can find all the details about eligibility for student visas. The difficulty that we are seeing with student visas now is not about whether or not you may be eligible to get one. It's about how Immigration New Zealand are processing them. And what we are noticing is a very strict assessment of student visas. We are noticing a lot of declines based on seemingly innocuous problems in the application that previously would not have been a problem. For example, and this is really the key point for student visas, the assessment of bona fides, or your good faith, or at least your genuine intention. This is a core function of any visa application, but when it comes to student visas, the immigration officer will very seriously look at, are you a genuine student? Or are you just using this student visa process to just get out of your country or to move to New Zealand. Are you going to be a genuine student? And so when they assess this, they're going to look at your current employment, past employment, your previous study, how long since you previously were in studies, how does the proposed study fit in with your career and your pathways of life? How does your story about how you feel it fits in match with their understanding of reality? So this is quite, you could say it's quite a subjective assessment, and this is where you see that immigration officers do have a lot of discretion. And the examples that we are seeing in some of the decline letters are things like, hey, we noticed that you've provided in your statement of purpose, that you want to study this postgraduate diploma in business because it will help you to understand international marketing and business better, and that fits in with your career as a bank worker so that you can grow up to higher levels. However, when we called you on the phone for a verification interview, you could not describe to us the details of the course that you were planning to study, and your answers were very short and awkward, so we are not satisfied that you are a genuine student. And this is frustrating for a number of reasons. As you can imagine, an immigration interview on the phone is a stressful thing in and of itself, but also English may be your second language. Also, you may not know a lot about the course you're studying. It may be something that was recommended to you by an agent or an advisor. And so for this reason, you want to make sure that you really understand what you're doing and that you're getting into it for the genuine reasons. Now, another big thing we are seeing with problems with student visas is the documentation that proves where you got your money from and how much money you have and whether it's genuinely available to you. Now, previously immigration were a little bit looser, whereas now we are seeing that they are picking every line in your bank statement, and they are picking every dollar where or rupee or rand or wherever you are applying from. They're picking out every little piece to assess, is this your money? Is it genuinely available to you? Has it been lawfully obtained? Does it seem credible and reasonable that you would have this money and that you would be able to use it for your support? Because when you apply for the student visa in New Zealand, not only do you have to have the funds available for the studies, but you have to have available funds for your maintenance while you're in New Zealand. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to work my 20 hours a week while I'm there, that'll support me. No, you actually have to point to an evidence of your own funds or support from a family member or someone else that's genuine and the money's available to you to the tune of about $20,000 per year. So this is the trend we are seeing with student visas. More strict application of the policy, more strict application of discretion, and we're seeing a lot of declines on the first attempt. And in many cases, we do see approvals on the second or third attempt if we can address those issues in each attempt. But we are seeing a very strict approach. And for this reason, we are trying to encourage people that if they're considering to study in New Zealand, that they really should be considering something at the higher level of study, okay? So postgraduate, masters, or higher, or if it's at a lower level, that it should be something above a basic diploma, what we call a level 6 or 7 diploma, and they should be considering something like a bachelor degree. Fundamentally though, of course, there are just going to be some people who may not be suited towards studying in New Zealand. And this is again where I think it's important that you get good advice, talk to somebody who really knows what they're doing, not just someone who's interested in making money off you. Because if you can find a way to tie everything in really professionally, then like I said, maybe that first attempt doesn't work, but the second or third may. But always keep an open mind to that. Student visa is always there as an option. Okay, now the last thing I wanted to talk about today, just to keep this video not too long, we'll get on to the last thing I wanted to talk about, which is the new approach to character assessments in New Zealand. So what is a character assessment? Okay, fundamentally, every visa application has to be assessed according to certain metrics, and each category has its own metrics. For student visas, as I said, bona fides, for work visas, the job, for partnership visas, your partnership and relationship, But for every single visa application, immigration officers also must assess your health and your character. Now, health assessments, as I'm sure you are aware, are done through the medical system, medical process, which is all dealt with by the medical assessment team. Character assessments are fundamentally based on a police certificate from the country that you come from and any countries where you've lived and meet the threshold for requirement of that police certificate. But also, character assessment looks into whether or not you have been truthful. Now, I'm sure everybody understands that, the path to righteousness is through honesty, right? Now, Immigration New Zealand takes this very, very seriously. If there is something about your application or your background or your past which may not be, may not be clean, then of course that's an issue for character, criminal convictions or deportations or visa refusals. But even worse than that is that you may lie about it or withhold it or not tell Immigration New Zealand about it. So previously, Immigration New Zealand has always taken the approach that if it is found that you may have provided false and misleading information in an application, or if you may have withheld what they would determine to be material information, then previously they would always first consider whether you intended to do so, and consider whether maybe it was a mistake or maybe somebody else did it on your behalf, such as an agent, advisor, or lawyer. And of course, if they determined that you may not have intended to provide false information, or you may not have intended to withhold material information, then they can deem you to meet the character requirements and be approved the visa anyway. Once they would find out that no, you did intend to lie or withhold information, then they would start the process of a character waiver assessment, or deeming whether a character waiver is required. And just quickly, what a character waiver is where they determine that you don't meet the character requirements, but they waive that requirement and allow you a visa anyway. Okay, so whereas that was the case in the past, now there's been a sort of not a change in policy, but a change in approach to applying the policy. And that is that they are now relying on a section of the Immigration Act which allows the immigration officer to essentially just go straight ahead and decline an application based on character once it's been determined that there is false information, regardless of how it was provided and whether you intended to provide it. Now, this is rough because so many people, when filling in immigration forms, just make a mistake. You tick the wrong box, or you see a long list of questions. Are you a terrorist at the top? Oh no. Are you someone who commits hate crimes? No. And you start going through the list and you think, oh, it must be all no because I'm a good guy, and you start ticking no to everything. But you need to pay attention, because down the bottom there are questions like, have you received advice on this application? And if you have received advice from an advisor or an agent or something, you're supposed to say yes and put their name there. Or number two, have you been refused entry or banned from another country, or have a refused visa? And many people just forget. Oh yeah, I got a decline from USA one time, and they just forget. But forgetting is now no longer an excuse. And immigration, if they find out that you've said no, but the answer should have been yes, they can go straight through to determining that you are not meeting the character requirements, and in theory just immediately apply a decline to your visa. In practice, they'll raise questions and have you explain it all, but this is very problematic. In addition to making a mistake on an application, many of you guys will use an offshore agent for this or previous applications, and that offshore agent may even say to you, oh, don't tell them about that past decline for Canada, because if they know about that, they won't grant your visa. Well, this is, first of all, very bad advice, because you're supposed to be truthful. But secondly, if an agent does that and then they submit the application on your behalf without telling you about the forms or what they've done, you don't know what's been submitted on your behalf. You might get that visa, but then once you're in the country and applying for a further visa, as soon as Immigration New Zealand finds out that any false information has been provided, you then get pushed onto this spiraling downwards process where they essentially say you are not of good character. This is what we call, I guess you could call it strict liability in law, where you are deemed to have committed the offence whether or not you intended to do so. So if this is something that has already happened to you, then you really should start to talk to some professionals to help you out with any future application. If you are someone who's about to apply for a visa, it's even more so important that you are truthful down to the T for your visa application. If you take a blasé approach, just tick the boxes as you feel, and then they later on find out that, hey, hang on a second, you lied. Oh, no, I didn't lie. I just filled in the forms as I thought. Oh, I didn't realize. No, you lied. You lied because it's a declaration, and you sign a declaration at the end of application that says, I declare that everything in this application form is truthful. And so, yeah, this is quite a serious change, and something for everyone to really, really be careful about. Okay, so that wraps it up for our mid-year catch-up in a very general sense, just to talk about where these visa categories are at. We try to make some more videos as time goes by, and if you guys have any questions specifically that you want me to address in any of these videos, put them in the comments and let me know. And yeah, ka kite ano. Goodbye, everybody.